Hi, and welcome to my shop. In the last episode, I completed the case construction of my hanging wall cabinet. I joined the top and bottom to the sides using through dovetails, and I put this curved profile on the top, the bottom, and this one shelf that's going to sit on top of a set of 3 drawers at the bottom of this case. So my next step is to join this shelf into the casework, and then I can build the drawer dividers as well as the shelves that will go in the top of the case, and that would complete the entire carcass. Now, when considering how I'm going to join this shelf to the sides of the case, I really have 2 options. I could do a dado, where this would just slide into the dados on either side, and that would house the shelf, or I could use a sliding dovetail. I think I'm going to go with the sliding dovetail, particularly because this is going to house the drawers, and there will be some amount of racking when those drawers are slid in and out. But when it comes to the shelves and the top, that's where I'll probably go with just dados that the shelves will slide into. I have one other sort of design decision to make at this stage as well. When I'm doing these dados or sliding dovetail, depending on which shelf you're talking about, I could stop those cuts so that you're going to see just a nice seamless front without any joinery, or I could have those go all the way through to the front so that you can actually see the joinery. Now, I think from a design perspective, since I'm already exposing my dovetails on the corners, I might as well go ahead and expose the joinery on the front as well. Okay, now I'm over at my table saw, and essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut a shallow dado where the sliding dovetail is going to go. And that'll just mean that I have to have a slightly shouldered sliding dovetail, but that really helps with the alignment and the seating of that shelf within the sides. So I have my white line there, I know I'm in the right spot, and I've got my pencil mark here, and I've just lined up my pencil mark with the outside edge of that blade. Then all I need to do, is adjust my miter sled here and make sure that I'm dead on. And the dado stack that I have inserted here is exactly 5/16 of an inch wide, which is the same width as the shelf that I'm going to be doing. One other thing I should mention is that I'm putting a little piece of blue tape on the very back of this, and I'm hoping that that's going to prevent any chip out that might happen at the back end of the blade. I'm doing that rather than putting a backstop against the entire board here. And then just to double check, fits perfectly. Now my next step is coming over to the router table, and this is where I'm going to cut the actual dovetail groove through the board. And I've got my mini dovetail bit here. This is actually from my Porter Cable dovetail kit. Just happens to be the smallest dovetail bit that I have. Now the trick here is I need that dovetail to be lined up so that it's exactly centered with that dado that I cut. And that's a little bit of a tricky operation. There's no way to sort of automatically center that or measure it out. So what I've done is if I pick up the front of the board here and I push the entire miter gauge forward, I can actually sit my groove right on top of the dovetail bit, and I have to ensure that that dovetail bit is rotated so that it's at its widest point in this direction. And if I do that, I kind of sighted down and tried to align it so that the gap on either side was exactly the same. I even went as far as to take a feeler gauge and find one where I can just barely fit it into either side of that dovetail. So that's about the best I can do to try to center this. If it's not, completely 100% centered to the last micron, I can still adjust that when I cut the mating side on the shelf itself. Here you can see both boards after I've removed the tape. There's a little bit of fuzz that I'll need to go in and clean up, but for the most part, see if I can give you a good profile view here. Came out pretty well. I think I can work with that. All right, now I'm ready to take my first pass at cutting the dovetails in the ends here. What I've done is I had to lower the bit slightly. It was a little bit of trial and error to get it just right. But essentially I have to lower it by the depth of the shoulder that I used. And then I can move the fence in and out to take as much or as little off as I want. So I've got it set sort of on a very conservative side where this will likely end up being too big. But then what I'll do is I'll start sneaking up on it until it fits perfectly. So just doing a little test fit here. I can see that it's still just a little tiny bit too big. So what I'm going to do is move my fence back ever so slightly and make another pass on one side, test it. Still doesn't fit, I'll flip it over, make another pass, test it again, and I'll keep going until I get it right on. All right, I've now made 3 extra passes, 2 extra passes on the top and the bottom, and then in the end, 1 extra pass just on the top on both sides. And that is the charm right there. For the next step of the project, I need to cut the dados that are going to receive the shelves. Now, because of my design, these dados are actually going to be stopped. They're not going to go all the way through to the front, and that way you're going to see a nice, clean face on the front of the case. You're not going to see the shelves where they intersect with the sides. So this blue tape demarks where the end of each of my dados needs to be. I've also put a thin pencil line exactly at the bottom of each of the dados that I need to cut. I went back to my SketchUp diagram and just measured each of them from the bottom of the case side. I'm going to be using my dado jig here along with my plunge router. I have to use the plunge router because I need to plunge down right at the edge of that blue tape and then come back up at the edge of the blue tape on the other side. I just have both the front and the left and the right side taped together here so that I'm ensuring that the dado falls in the exact same spot on both sides of the case. That eliminates any potential for me to cut on the wrong side of the line or have a mismatch between left and right. Now I really don't get a second chance for this, so hopefully I've got everything working properly and I cut a nice clean dado. All right, so I finished cutting my stopped dados, and at first glance, everything looked good. All of my stops happened just shy of the blue tape all the way around. That's good news. But what I found is with my last cut, when I did my plunge, the plunge depth stop here on my router had rattled loose. So instead of stopping my plunge at the 1/4 inch depth that I had it set, I plunged straight all the way through. Now that's not a problem, of course, on the inside here. These dados still look just fine, but if you look on the other side of my piece, I now have this nice, perfectly round hole on one of the sides. You can see this is fairly prominent. If you look, that tape there means that that's going to be the front of the left-hand side. So essentially, right about an inch in the front of the left-hand side is a nice clean bullet-looking hole. So this is what I like to call lemonade time. So I stepped back a little bit and kind of calmed down and gave some thought as to how I could repair this. Now one option is I could take a plug hole cutter and cut a little piece of mahogany, even line the grain up so that it repairs that and kind of just blends it right in. If I really nail the grain, it's pretty you know, capable of hiding a blemish like that because it's such a perfectly round hole. But at the end of the day, I feel like, you know, if you were to inspect it closely, you'd still be able to tell that there was a repair done there. And I think that sort of detracts from the overall quality and craftsmanship of the piece. So what I'm leaning toward is actually using some sort of contrasting material, maybe a white holly, or even something like mother of pearl. You can buy mother of pearl dots that are the same diameter, and maybe even add additional holes with additional inlay to make it look like it was an intentional design element. So I'm going to give that a little bit more thought, but it's sort of a chance to kind of take my lemons and turn them into lemonade. And in many cases in the past, where I've, you know, kind of had to think out of the box like this creatively, I've ended up building a design element into the overall piece that actually, I think, added more than had I not had that design element. I've gone ahead and cut my shelf pieces to size now, and I'm just sliding them into the carcass. I've already slid the bottom shelf with the sliding dovetail in there. And the fit is just right. Let's see, which is the top. That's the bottom. So here is our first look at the casework itself, kind of dry assembled, obviously without the drawers and the door fronts done. But I'm at least at the point where I know all of my main carcass components are fitted, and I can step back and kind of see how this whole thing looks for the first time. Now, if you look closely here at the sides, you'll see that my shelves are recessed quite a bit. Well, the reason for that is that what I'll ultimately need to do is cut a notch on the front corner of each of these shelves, and then that will slide forward another 1/4 of an inch, and that'll give it a nice clean look and feel. And it'll still leave the 1/2 inch that I need for the rails and stiles of the door. The other thing that we'll do is, right now, all of these shelves actually extend all the way to the back of the case. But for the final piece, I'm going to have a rabbet cut all the way around the frame, and then of course these will be a 1/4 of an inch indented as well, and then I'm going to have the case back will sit recessed into that that cavity. So I'm not going to cut those actual notches into these shelves until after I glue up the case, so that I can actually, you know, really fine tune based on the final, you know, distance between the sides after the glue sets.